Hey boys, how you doing? How's your week going? Hey, did I ever tell you about my Wednesday morning theory? Well, I need to tell you about this one. Let's get into it. On a Tuesday morning in September of 2001, our country got attacked. Old son, you had just turned a year old a week prior to that, and I was separated from your mom and had been for a couple months at that time. I was living with a friend of mine in South Salt Lake, and I woke up and saw the news just like everyone else. On weekday mornings back then, I would have to go downtown to meet your mom to pick you up so she could go to work and I would watch you during the day. That morning was no different. When I met your mom, we talked about what happened, and we talked about the possibility that I might have to go back into the Marine Corps. You see, I had only been out of the Marine Corps for 2 years at that point, and when you get out of active duty, there is something called the inactive ready reserves that you are automatically in for 4 years. So the possibility of me having to go back in and get deployed was high. We talked about what that would mean and what that would look like in regards to you. The rest of the details of that morning will be taught in history for as long as our nation survives. Everyone has their own 9/11 story. Mine isn't unique and mine isn't special. However, I want to talk about what happened the day after and the effects that it had on our society. And this is what I call the Wednesday morning theory. You see, I'm a member of Generation X. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. And back then, both parents generally had to work, so I was what was referred to as a latchkey kid. This was very common back then. It meant that when I got home from school, there was no parents in the house as they were still at work, and I generally had an hour and a half to 2 hours of no adult supervision. You could talk to anyone that grew up when I grew up, and they probably have a very similar story. For a couple hours after school, you could have friends over, you could binge watch MTV and eat snacks. Basically, you had the run of the house until your parents got home every day after school. It was awesome. Back then, when we wanted to play, we just got on our bikes and we rode around the neighborhood. Sometimes we'd ride all the way into downtown and we'd mess around, going through abandoned buildings, running on train tracks, just having adventures. There were no cell phones to track us, and the only directive we had was to be home for dinner at a certain time. It was really quite incredible. But the Wednesday morning theory explains how all that changed. You see, the day after that happened, our society went into survival mode, and I'm afraid it never got out of it. And old son, this explains why you had the childhood that you did. And young son, it explains why you're having the childhood that you have now. Instead of free play, you now have organized sports. If you want to play with friends, we drive you to a field where there is an organized activity, and we stand there and we surveil you the entire time. Whenever you're in the car, you're in a car seat or buckled in. When I was a kid and we'd go on road trips, I'd lay in the back of the station wagon, or sit on the back gate of the Jeep and just stare out the back window. Not anymore. Now it's all about safety. Before that Tuesday morning, when a vacation started, that was the start of the vacation. The airport and the airplane were part of the experience. They were part of the vacation. Now they're just something we have to suffer through to get to the place we really want to go. Instead of that airplane being part of the experience, it's just a miserable commute we have to endure until we actually get to the destination that we're going to. Assault rifles became legal in the name of home self-defense. Even though the name assault implies offense, it is rationalized that we need these weapons of war in order to keep ourselves safe from our fellow citizens. Government surveillance reached unparalleled levels. The whole notion of privacy was thrown out the window, and now you can easily expect, as you are, to be surveilled and monitored and watched at any time and at all times. This is why, old son, I had a better childhood than you did. And young son, I have a feeling that my childhood will be better than yours. So even though it was well within my power to allow you to go have free play, ride your bike around the neighborhood, ride it down in the city, and have your own adventures, I didn't. Because just like so many others, I was gripped by what the Wednesday morning theory describes. I was gripped in fear. We went from living to just surviving, and I'm afraid we've never really snapped out of that. Now our society lives in survival mode as a norm. We make decisions based on fear, not what is bold or progressive. And in this society of survival, conspiracy theories thrive, xenophobia skyrockets, and the distrust becomes normal. All it took was one evil man to change the way that we look at each other and change the way that we treat each other. Old son, it may be too late for your generation. I hope not, but it may be. But young son, I have faith that your generation will be the one that changes this. My hope is that your generation reduces the demand of the tools of our own self-imposed containment of fear. I hope that your generation sees social media as what it truly is, stupid and unimportant. And I hope the demand for it reduces so far that this guy cries and just shuts down all the servers and no one ever logs in again to those platforms. I hope that your generation goes full hipster and realizes smartphones are dumb and needless, and that life was so much better when we didn't have a computer in our pocket at all times. I hope your generation makes it so the only phones that are getting made are landlines, and when people go out to a restaurant, they can actually engage instead of doing this. I hope that people realize that the society around them is what needs to be engaged in, not the phone in their hand. I hope that people realize that it's okay to mix in different tribes and different groups, because the problem with cell phones and social media, especially when they're used in conjunction, is that you never have to leave your tribe. You can get stuck with a way of thinking and never have it challenged because you always have your tribe with you. My hope is that your generation puts all of that in the past. I hope your generation lets your kids free play, get on their bikes and ride around whenever, with no directive, only to be home at a certain time for dinner. And I hope your generation sees the stockpiling of arms in one's house as an overreaction. Yes, my childhood was better than yours, but you can fix it. It's too late for me, old son. I hope it's not too late for your generation, but it may be. My hope is that your generation will change, so instead of living like we did on Wednesday morning, we can go back to living like we did on Monday, the day before September 11th, when we still viewed ourselves as Americans and citizens and friends and neighbors, and no longer live in survival mode. Anyway, boys, that's my theory. You got to come up with your own. And as always, I love you, I'm proud of you, and I think you're wonderful. We'll see you next week.